Miguel Selvelli to talk to us and to present his book. By the way, there are a few copies on sale for only €25, just published in Italian and English, and the publisher and French and Greek. So it is a true Levantine book, and the publisher is Italian, based in Athens. And Miguel knows his subject from before he was born. He's the descendant of 3 families that lived in Istanbul in the 19th century: Fotini, Selvelli, and Seminati. And he's already written about Italian exiles in the Ottoman Empire in the 19th century, when the Ottoman Empire was the last refuge for liberals and revolutionaries in some cases. And now he has produced, with Francesco Poggiluni, who unfortunately cannot be with us, Smyrna and Italy, Comunità, Relazione, Istituzioni, which I think is the first book on the subject of Smyrna and Italy. And it's so often forgotten that we're now in the 100th anniversary of the Smyrna catastrophe, the fire and massacre of people in Smyrna, September 1922, and there was a huge Italian presence, Italian troops, Italian ships, and people with Italian passports in Smyrna then. And Miguel will now speak to us, will now make a presentation of his book, Smyrna and Italy, Communities, Relations and Institutions of a Levantine City.
Yeah. I will go there. So, hello everybody. It's an honor to be here. I'm very happy. I'm also excited, of course. Generally, I always feel out of place everywhere I go because of my family history and also professional history and academic career. I don't have a proper career in history, so academic career. I'm actually graduated from Polytechnical, but following my story of my family and moving to Istanbul in 2006 and living there for 10 years and then 5 years now in Greece on the island of Lesbos, I became, we can say, an independent researcher, whatever that means. But it means that I'm not linked to an institution, and I devote most of my life to research about these topics. And so I was saying, I hope today I will not feel out of place, because I am a member of the Associazione Amicizia Italia-Turchia. I am from since last year, and since 5-6 years I'm an active member of the LHF. And I'm also a student at Fosbury. I'm actually, I'm in the 3rd year in the Department of Philosophy. So, but today I could just present my book, but I decided to make something a little bit more special, so that even here I will feel a bit more out of place. And because I think we need to reflect very much on what we're dealing when we say Levantine studies. What is the topic of Levantine studies? And so, but before starting, I just found this amazing, a few weeks ago, I got into this book in 2012, Brokering Empire, Trans-Imperial Subjects between Venice and Istanbul, and I said, okay, while preparing for this event, I should read it. And there is an amazing chapter called, like this, Levantine Genealogies of Category. If you didn't read it, it's amazing. And there is here I discovered that in 16th century, in Venice, the Levantine, so the first time that the word started to be used in a wider and broader and more frequent context, was in Venice to define the Jews that had escaped from Spain and Portugal in 1492 and had found refuge in the Ottoman Empire, and were then coming to Venice to trade. So Levantine was, it was defining this sincerely, it was the first time. So for me it was very interesting to find this definition. And therefore I also discovered that there is the word Bonentini, which was the word that in Venice they would use to define the same Jews that from Spain had found refuge in Amsterdam, in Holland, in the Western Europe. So this was very interesting to discover this. And maybe it was a late discovery, but it was really interesting. And also because we are in Venice, I thought it was due to tell you about this. But now, coming back to the issue of the book. This is what I want to say. We need history, but not like the spoiled idler in the garden of knowledge. What I mean, from my point of view, and I think from the point of view of the Levantine Heritage Foundation, but also Associazione Amicizia Italia-Turchia, I want to make a step back from purely academic context. So that's what I do, and to think of why we are interested in so much, we that are here at least, not so many maybe, but in the issue of Levantine studies, and why it started to be so important and considered in these last 20-30 years. Because if we think about the Levantine, in let's say in the second half of the 20th century, there is very few research or interest about the topic. But just now, and I think it's because the model of the national state is starkly deteriorating. We are seeing all the problems with the issues of migration, of transcultural relations that we are into in this age, especially after the 90s, when things started to become more and more troubled, let's say, and fluid in the issue of movements of people. We are wondering about, maybe unconsciously, there is this need to find other models, alternative models of living together and dealing with difference, dealing with the difference that every person brings, coming from other cultures, from other religions, from other confessions, with other languages. So that's why so I also wonder, what is the topic, and can we define it historically, geographically? Of course, Eastern Mediterranean is very important in it defines it. The history, yes, of course, we can define it. It has different phases, as we know. Also, how we define Levantine and how this model of cohabitation develops through the centuries. So there is a big difference between, as we saw, in the 15th or 16th century, and then what happens in the 19th century, especially, let's say after 1850s, these last 50, 60 years of the Ottoman Empire, where that Philip Mansell has defined as catastrophe and splendor. But what changes? What are the models of cohabitation that develops? And then, of course, the issue of institutions, so the capitulations, the free trade agreements, the jurisprudence that is needed, the institutions that are all this intertwining, interlinking of different institutions is very interesting also for now, I think. This is why we start, now that we are dealing with these issues again, somehow, after that for 50, 60, 70 years, national state has been a very fixed model that was working somehow, one nation, one state, one language, one people. Now we're again, we have to go back. So that's why I think it may be a way of life or a state of mind. This is what I'm thinking. And also, I want to say, at the same time, instead of leaving ourselves to a sort of nostalgia or idealization of that period, we should remember that in the Ottoman Empire, in the main city, in Istanbul, but also in many other cities, when the day the Ottoman government decided, so you understand which date are these, they are the dates when Ottoman Empire is about to enter the war on the side of Germany, First World War and Austro-Hungarian Empire. The government decides to abolish capitulation populations, after years and years that they wanted to do that, or somehow they wanted to find at least some sort of midway agreement with all the different states, Western states. These agreements had been established since centuries, but they were not able because of how to say, contractual power. They were not able. They were trying, but they were not able. And then at some point, they do it abruptly, like this. And as you also know, this will not end here. I mean, it will not. It will last years and years for the international law. But at least, what is important to remember is always that the Ottoman Muslim population of the empire went out on the street to celebrate this important event, because this splendor of the Levantine, of the non-Muslim communities that were living there, were producing a sort of, how to say, uncomfortable feeling, at least in the, so they were seeing like excessive privilege that the non-Muslim communities, especially I'm talking about the Levantines, not Greeks or Armenians, but the Levantines were enjoying, were maybe excessive, and they were accumulating too much wealth. So also this is something that we should never forget, I think. And yeah, so what happened? This is the publisher with which we work on this book together with Francesco Congilupi. It's called ATP Books, and as Philip said, it's based in Athens. Everything came out of my networking, let's say. I got in touch with him with 2.5 years ago because I was interested why there is an Italian. I'm living in Greece since 5 years, in Lesbos. So what is an Italian doing in Athens with the publisher dealing with always with Italian Greek topics? So I was very curious, and we met. And he told me at that time, he was telling me that he was working on this book that then came out last year for the 200th anniversary of the Greek Revolution. And then he started to tell me, I guess I found the right person. I want to put a book in 2022 for Smyrna, about Italy, and then he offered me to take care of this book as an editor, and I involved also Francesco Congilupi, who has a more, how to say, proper academic background. So I think it was needed. But of course, these 2 years were a very long period of diplomatic and relations, because together with Francesco, we said, okay, we're doing a book about Italian Smyrna, so where can we find maybe some support, political and financial support, or institutional support? Nobody gave us any support, because Greece didn't want, Athens, Athens-based institutions for Italian consulate and embassy in Athens did not want to go, said, why should we? It's a Turkish city. Turkey, the Turkish institution said, or the Italian Culture Institute in Istanbul said, no, Smyrna, and the publisher is in Athens, so why should we give you? The Italian consul in Smyrna said, yes, you're right, we should do something, but what if some problem comes out in this book? And so in the end, that's nothing. So this is to say that this Levantine world is a little bit of an orphan at an institutional level, and because we here are doing so well, I think we should go even further. With these little institutions that we have, even if they are small, we should work more and more, because at the national state level, it's so difficult to find proper support. This is the index of the book. By the way, there is also another author of the book, is between us, there is Laurence Abenson-Razan. She's here. So as you see, we made these 3 sections. Although they are a little bit, artificial, we just try to gather a little bit force in 3 different chapters. We have chapters dealing with more about the communities. So we have about the Jews. We have about the intercommunal relations Italians and Jews during the Greek occupation, which is a very interesting, from my point of view, article. We have a very interesting article about the fascist period, the post-fascist period, so 43-45. And then we have more on the architecture art production by Italians and some of whatever by institutions or artists that were coming from the Italian peninsula. And yeah, and then about schools and newspapers. So this is in general what we do. Now I want to go into a little bit this more field. So I want to say that whenever we're dealing with this Levantine issues that we care about so much, and if we want to make it a little bit more, how to say, interesting, and to provide it enough complex material so that it can be appreciated or stimulating for different categories of people, I want to say. I made this, as you said, now that I live in Greece, I learned Greek alphabet. So I said this, now I want to tell you, I want to explain. So when I say psychoanalysis, every time we get into Levantine issues, I wonder, why are we interested? And because of what are we interested in Levantine issues? And this is, I'm always curious when I meet somebody. I try to understand, or at least to guess. So because this is also for me. I think these are most of the reasons, and but I would be curious if I missed some of these. And all of these are, of course, legitimate, but I think also not problematic, but to be problematized. So I wonder, so in order to avoid what Nietzsche criticized, so just to see history as a garden of knowledge where you just pick and just not to get bored, and if we want to give to our production of knowledge a little bit more critical understanding or critical approach, first of all, we should do this that in anthropology is very common since the 40, 50 years at least. Why in anthropology now it's impossible that you decide to select a topic and then you don't start asking yourself why, and you write at least a couple of pages on why I chose this topic, so that you make this self-analysis, like a critical reflection on why. And I think it helps the mind to clear out some issues. This is, by the way, this is not so much related with the book, but this is what the book made me think about, and what I hope to, in the following up of my research, also as a person that wants to spread knowledge about the Levantine issues. And then, of course, the issue of when I say philosophy, I mean we need so many different disciplines to disentangle this field of study. It's like none of that is enough, and I think we need more and more and more, and we even need to add. I mean, of course, all of these, economic sociology, anthropology, jurisprudence, theology, maybe even today we heard a lot about this. But we need more also to know about the political. For example, I think I was very much under studied is the political ideas, the political environment. What was, I mean, especially consider that my focus is the 19th century. So in a period where everywhere politics, political production of political theory or political ideas were so important. I think we need a lot to work on this. And then, of course, consider also if there was, what was the colonial impact on the Levantine environment. I mean, was Smyrna how much was Smyrna a colony of Britain, of France, of I mean, when we think that all the most beautiful area of Smyrna, the richest area of Smyrna, the area with the most services, hygienic conditions, was the French, so-called Franco area, so where all the non-Muslims were living, while the Muslim population was living on the. That's an issue. This is, of course, not all Levantines were in the were rich or were the bourgeoisie. This is another myth, of course, that has to be discussed and deconstructed. But this is issues that I think we need to delve in more. And then, yeah, because of Levantine Heritage Foundation, I think all these are issues that are so interesting for now, and I think it's very interesting to build up connections and bridges with other institutions. For example, as we were already thinking to do in Florence, these kind of masters that deal with intercultural integration, migration studies for the contemporary age. I think it's a very, very fruitful field to be discussed in other sectors, in other sectors that are also practically involved in some sort of political action. Of course, as I say, study of liminal and marginal communities, I mean, in Levantine studies, as already at Hamel and others, and Malte Fuhrmann has been noticing, I mean, as in any history, the prostitutes, the poorest section of the population has been totally forgotten. So this is also a very important topic to bring back the complexity of the Levantine community. So it's not only about diplomats, it's not only about Americans, it's not only about painters and successful musicians. To go back to that, I think we should study much more, focus much more on liminal communities. And what I mean with, I mean marginal communities. What I mean with liminal communities is these communities that are not considered totally Levantine, but were very often intermingling with Levantines. For example, in my case, is the Armenian Catholic community, the Greek Catholic community. This is, for me, it's something also that has not been, I think, studied enough. As this connection tissue between all the communities, so all the different, and then networks. It was so interesting to see that the network graph that Francisco showed before, and I think we should. I want to ask him now. So, how is the minute?
Yes, maybe 1 or 2 more minutes.
Okay. Well, then I just wanted. So my approach, mainly, as you can see also in another book, is this what I call prosopography. I like this word, so not biography. So I go and try to focus on the complexity of one single character and build and reconstruct all the different relations that this person had in the society, at the institutional level, at the family level, at the commercial, professional level. And this is, for me, I mean, this is my way of doing it, but in it I try to put in all the different disciplines that I showed you before. Maybe not post-colonial studies yet, but I mean, theology, jurisprudence, anthropology. And I like the word person, prosopos, and I see that it's starting to be more and more this issue about dwelling and going deep into the lives of these characters. I think you know this Antoine Copé, who even became so popular. So this is a proof of a way of doing that is accessible to the public, and that can. This is my parents realized, and I told them, "Did you see about this?" And I had this very interesting book, the academic book. I had it. I had read it, but I didn't know that it was even on RAI. So on the national television, it had been shown this. And what I mean with prosopo, the reason why I use the word prosopo instead of biography, is that it means face, person, character from all, and it's actually person. So it's the life of the person, and persona, means mask. It's in the etymology Agia, so it was the theater character. And what I want to say, and with this I will go to the close. This is my book where for 12 chapters, I chose 12 lives and I reconstruct. It's this, and this is where I wanted to finish with Venice and with the Mass. So what I want to say is that we need to go back to this idea that there is not an original identity where we have to go back and or roots where we have to go back. There is not like an Italian identity or a Turkish identity or French identity. So I'm thinking that we should start to consider Levantine not as an exception. I think the idea that something like French or Italian exists, this is the exception. I mean, we should start to think that the normality is to be Levantine in the meaning of having, being able to wear continuously different masks in your daily life, because you don't consider yourself above the rest of one, because you bring the important mask of the Italian mask or the Turkish mask and then the other. But in Levantine culture, what I try to imagine, if you want, a bit philosophically or even ingenuously somehow, but it's to be Levantine is to wear continuously a different mask according to the different condition of your life, because you know that everything is moving and everything is changing and everything is always about finding compromises and brokering and and everybody we are sharing the life with is somebody that we have to build up a common future, and not thinking that we are the citizen and that somebody else is foreign. So in this, I end and give the floor to Didem, who is. Can I introduce her?
Yes.
Another way, I think, very clear. I mean, this is what I told you about prosopography. I mean, the fact of building up biography, because this is my style. But of course, for example, in the case of Didem, she found out this amazing thing in the field of history of architecture about the collaborations of Venetians, Greek Catholics, Orthodoxes in the Ottoman Empire. And this is another way to forget about the idea that there is a clash of civilizations, that there is Europe and Ottoman Empire. It was always flowing and interactive. That's it.
Firstly, I would like to thank the editors of the book and the Levantine Heritage Foundation for their kind invitation. Today, I'm going to speak about the Fotini Church as a concrete cultural memory of the Levantines of Smyrna. The church was already very important at its time as church, but it was extremely important for its connections with the Venice Republic. So I want to speak about the architectural information we gathered in the documents of the State Archives of Venice. Fotini Church of Smyrna was a Greek Orthodox metropolitan church, but now we are learning that the church was financially and politically supported by Venice at least during 24 years. Actually, these documents are highly visible for the researchers studying the Ottoman history. But at the first glance, it may not be understood that these architectural drawings belong to the Fotini Church of Smyrna due to a different title. Because in the documents, the name of the church is indicated as Santissima Concezione. In the upper right part of this photo of Smyrna at the end of the 19th century, we can see the church up as a silhouette. This church was one of the main symbols of the Levantine culture in Smyrna, but unfortunately it was completely destroyed by the fire of 1922. The church was located in the French quarter of its time, so the Alsancak district of today. Traditional sources do not provide information on the exact date of the construction of the church, which is roughly placed around the 17th century. Also, we don't have any detailed plan of the building, except for some simple drawings on the old insurance maps of the city made in 19th and 20th centuries. The church especially was famous for its quite high bell tower, and the courtyard of the church was an important gathering point for the social and political activities of the Smyrna Levantines. There is no doubt that the church, which survived for more than 3 centuries, has undergone numerous renovations and restorations. In the documents of Venice archives, there are 2 ancient plans of the church. One of them refers to the year 1600, and the other to 1624. It seems that the plans are drawn very roughly and without scale. Therefore, it will be possible to evaluate this drawing, which certainly was not made a professional with knowledge of architecture, by referring only to some basic references. In the first plan, in 1600, we can see that the building has a very simple plan, consisting only of a small chapel with a single apse and a narthex. In the north of the chapel, we see the Greek cemetery, the metropolitan's residence in the south, and an empty land called Jardin de Cozaburat in the east. All of these references, and in particular the statement of a paragraph written on the floor plan, leave no doubt that this was the oldest floor plan of the Fotini church. Actually, at the first glance, the plan on the insurance map drawn in the 1905 does not correspond to the plan of 1624 in the archive. However, considering the area on which the building is located and its dimensions as they appear in the drawing that we have found, we can say with certainty that it's the same church. The western facade of the church was built adjacent to the public road, while in numerous other examples, the sacred buildings are located in the center of a courtyard surrounded by a hall. Furthermore, in the plan of 1624, the south facade of the church appears adjacent to a house indicated as the house of the Greek metropolitan. The same goes for the map in the year 1905. An examination of the plan of 1624 shows that the building is made up of 10 distinct closed volumes, arranged in an inverted L shape, and 2 large courtyards connected to each other and divided into 2, one of which is used as a cemetery. There is also another volume marked with the number 2, adjacent to the south facade, which seems to have been preserved in the later plan as the entrance hall of the church. A kitchen overlooks the large courtyard, which has a well in the southeast corner. The plan, out of scale, prevents us from grasping the details of the building. However, the expression "little house above which leads to the room on the same same size with the attic above, suggests that the building is multi-story and covered by a sloping roof. Considering this photo, probably made at the end of the 19th century, one can think that the perimeter corridor, the apse and the apsidials on the east side of the church were added during the renovation of the original rectangular structure, which was devoid of apse, carried out in the following centuries. It is possible to note that the perimeter corridor on the shape of an inverted U form is lower than the church, and that the roof was sloping. These extensions may have been built around the volume referred as church and positioned in the southwest corner of the building in the 1624 plan. However, since we don't have information of scale on this plan, it is very difficult to be sure that the dividing walls of the other rooms surrounding the space indicated as church have been removed in order to obtain a larger space for the liturgical function. According to documents, the land in question, which actually belonged to the Greek Orthodox community before 1600, contained the metropolitan's residence, a church and a cemetery. The name of the church already at that time was Agia Fotini. In 1600, an agreement was signed between the Greek metropolitan of the time, Macarius, and the Venetian community led by Giorgio Justinian, who was then consul of Smyrna. According to the agreement, the Venetians acquired the land on which these structures were located and the temple that had been rebuilt on that land. Under the agreement, Venice would also have paid the annual rent and regularly supplied the church with 822 Agia e 822 olio. Here, opt must be the shortened term for Real de Ocho, the Spanish silver coin, in Italian, pezzi d'altro. Obviously, the Republic of Venice was paying the rent with wax and oil, which is needed most, both for church rituals and as a means of illumination. In the documents containing the explanation of the plan, it is mentioned that the structure was built and covered with the first intervention by the Venetians in 1600. At this point, it is understood that the ancient church, or more precisely, the abandoned chapel, was unusable. In 1605, in memory of Pope Paul V, thanks to Agostino Nani, the Holy Ambassador of Venice, who is one of the founders of this church and who became for a short time apostolic of this church, the name of the church was changed to Santissima Concezione. In the documents, after the expenses incurred for the foundations of the church, all the materials were listed from year to year. For example, lamps, candlesticks, oil, nails, hammer, cloth, carpets, ways, benches, ribbon, silk, books, luck, timber, meat, pears, figs and grapes, celeries, for the rent of the house, and many other things like that. So nearly all needs of the church were provided by Venice. All of these expenses on the list were made between 1600 and 1624. It is possible to make some deductions from what we learned from the documents on the history of the church. Before the church assumed the characteristic present in the 19th century, it was progressively enlarged, almost like a biological formation growing from the original nucleus, with dozens of renovations or restorations and additions made on the first building built in 1600. The only feature of the building which has been preserved was built adjacent to the main road. Also, one of the most important issues to point out is that, according to the plan from 1624, the building doesn't actually look like a church at all. It looks like a large residence with courtyards and outbuildings. It has no apse, dome, or bell tower that define it as a church. The reason for this must be the notorious ban on building new churches in the Ottoman Empire. The prohibition was against ringing the bells and building new churches. The ban in question was lifted only with the declaration of Tanzimat Fermanı in 1839. Thanks to the new rights and freedoms granted to non-Muslim minorities. Therefore, it is no coincidence that the bell tower of Agia Fotini was built in 1856. And the same period, the apse and apsidios might have been added to the structure. In fact, as never seen before in previous maps, the church of Agia Fotini was shown for the first time as a church with 3 naves and 3 apses in the city plan of the years 1854-1856. Therefore, it is possible to think that the church of Agia Fotini is a joint project of the Greek Orthodox Church and the Venetian Republic. However, unfortunately, the information we try to cover here is limited to a single group of documents from the Venice State Archives. The documents we certainly have are not sufficient to find out when the church was again and completely taken over the Greek Orthodox community after 1624. But we will know, we know well that the Levantines of Smyrna, although belonging to different ethnic and religious identities, were living peacefully. In this sense, they formed a very articulated social structure. But at the same time, the agreement between Venetian Catholics and Greek Orthodox Church might have 2 other meanings. Apparently, the Greeks in Smyrna in the 1600s weren't so rich as the Venetians, so perhaps it was mostly financial solidarity. When we consider all these documents and information together, we can understand better why the construction date of the Church of Agia Fotini is not known with certainty. Obviously, the structure initially had to be hidden, and the Republic of Venice also changed the name of the church as if to establish a political dominance in this church. Although we do know exactly how long the church was called by this name, we can understand that it was preserved until at least 1624, when the documents we have discussed were drafted. Especially changing the name of the church obviously created an identification problem which we are trying to solve here. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Didem, for that wonderful talk, which highlights the importance of consulates and embassies, even or especially for people who did not depend on that country. The necessity for getting things done is still known today in, for example, Beirut, one of the last Levantine cities. Now, I thank you again to Miguel, and I would like to make 1 or 2 comments. Whether it was a colonial society, well, I think people might have thought it was, but they always forgot that who had the army, who had the troops, who had the barracks in Izmir. It's always the Ottoman Empire until 1919. And they frequently paraded their troops and invited the consuls to watch the parades, just to remind people, of course, the lesson didn't always sink in. And the definition of Levantine, well, the early dictionaries in French and English are very, very general. They say, Dictionary of Brunetière, 1695, Levantine, qui est né au Levant, whoever is born in the Levant. So it can mean what you want it to mean. Now, are there any questions before we go for coffee? Yes?
That was brilliant, and I really love that person, and very, very important person, and his remarks. I think it was fantastic to describe something that we inspire a lot. Did you ever live in Italy?
I'm starting to go more and more often, but I never lived. Because now I'm in Lesbos, in Italy.
Yes, it's very near.
Yeah, so I go very often. But why?
No, because I also wondered, so your family basically were from Istanbul?
Yeah. Yeah. The Pusic, on one side I moved to Izmir in the early 20s.
Yes.
In dealing with navigation and company.
Awesome.
Yeah.
There was a salt mine, which is kind of the northern Izmir, called Tuzla. The salt flats, Salina. And I think originally it was found by an Italian, and then eventually bought piece by piece, and then became debt administration. I wonder if you family had any connections with that.
No, but I will use it. Just
James.
So when you mentioned the idea of history, the colonial history in which Greeks and Italians, I wonder whether you consider there's a possibility of Izmir being Turkish Ottoman colony.
No, but in fact, I didn't want to, why I said post-colonial theory is just, I didn't want to, my issue is not like institutional, political, like who's the colony of who, of course, but just that in a state that should have full sovereignty, according to our now classic national state vision, in an area of the Ottoman, belonging to the Ottoman Empire, how much the other powers were, it's not a matter of political system, but more like culture. The amount of influence that they had, culturally, socially, economically, and then unavoidably also institutionally. The power, the army was the Ottoman, but the consuls in Israel were very powerful. In a word of the English consul, the French consul would be very powerful and would be heard and would be considered by the Ottoman authorities in order not to go into. So this is just something to be considered. And don't say, and I don't want to say it's good. It's not, we never end about whose territory, Byzantine, Roman, whatever.
Any more questions? Any more questions? Anybody? Well, we now adjourn for, yes.
Just a quick consideration to Dr. İşler. Yes, it is İşler, right? Yes, I'm publishing a paper about your church. We need to talk. Maybe
You are publishing an article
about this church in the second part of that century. So we need to talk.
Where are you publishing?
It is in a collective volume. So
I hope you will send the information to the LHS website, please.
Actually, I have a question. How did you find out about the connection that was I was in
already I'm studying on architectural interactions between Venice Republic and Ottoman Empire. I'm searching always architectural drawings about Ottoman territory. One day it was about Smyrna and it was interesting, but because of this name Also, I couldn't understand. This was Fotini church, but studying on this, and I showed here there was a paragraph on the plan. I learned that this was a famous, very famous church in Smyrna. Like this, just my subject about this is about this. I'm sorry because I'm not very good at English.
No, it's very good.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the information. Yes, one more question.
Yes, what was the word you thought was exalted?
On documents writes 22 oct punto 22 allora
OC, right?
OCT punto 22 di cera e OCT punto 22 di olio. I thought, I'm not sure that.
Yeah, because I thought it could have been Okka. But if there is T, maybe it's not Okka. So it seems strange to me that it's a measurement. It's
But not even reals. I mean, usually the councils of the ambassador of the Bible speak properly about reals. So it's not money. I don't think
It's not money. I don't think it's money either. I think it's a quantity of measurement.
I told so much on this, but I'm not sure. Just
need to see the document.
Anyway, thank you both very much for our wonderful speakers. And don't forget, this book is available from Miguel Selvelli, and we go